Hi friends. Um, I've been, today I'm talking in particular to my music theory, quote, students, unquote, those of you who are followers of my music theory for beginners page on Facebook. I've been remiss. I'm way overdue in adding any information to that. It's not because I haven't been thinking about it. The problem is how to present this information in a way that is sensible and is different from what you can find everywhere else, because you can already find it everywhere else. What's the point? The world doesn't need one more of the same thing it's already got. I'd like to give you something a little different. And my music theory classes so far, which are limited, have been focused largely on ears, on playing your music by ear, and not on theory in its written form. And that's cheating you in a way. I'm not sure how to express the written part of it in the format that I use, the videos, the YouTube videos, and what have you. Believe me, if you can't read music, but you consider yourself a musician, it's like being unable to read and write your native language, but considering yourself literate. You're not. Okay, you need to learn to write and read music. Whether I will ever address that in this course program is unclear to me. I'm not going to teach you to read your native language either, although I do teach that to people who ask me to and desire that I do so. As long as they share a native language with me, which is English, the American version. But nevertheless, what we're doing right now is music theory as you can comprehend with your eyes and ears without reading it. And so that means that basically everything that I'm talking with you about has to do with scales. Because what your ears hear and what you use if you're going to play by ear, improvise, or pick out songs by ear, is you use scales and intervals. You learn to recognize the intervals and to be comfortable within the structure that is a scale. There are basically three, in the broadest sense, three kinds of scales. There's the chromatic scale. That's the scale that's made up of every note we use in music in the Western music idiom. If you take a piano and all the white keys and all the black keys, and you start on a given white key and you poke every single key, white, black, white, black, 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 all the keys between there and the next time that same white key comes up, that's a chromatic scale. There are 11 unique tones plus a repeated first tone as a 12th tone. You always repeat your first tone as your last tone on scales. That repeated tone is the first tone with its vibration exactly doubled, and that is so much the same that your ears hear it as being all one sound. Even though you have a and a in there, your ears hear it. They know that's all one sound. Those two strings, one of them is vibrating exactly twice as fast as the other one. I'm using the harp as the frame or the framework for the teaching today. I know most of you don't have harps, but the harp has some characteristics that I'll go into that make it uniquely well suited for what I want to cover today, which is the relationship between major scales and minor scales. Now, I said there's three scales in the broadest sense. That's the chromatic scale, which is all the possible notes. There's the major scale, which is 7 unique tones plus a repeated one for the 8th in a given pattern of whole steps and half steps. If we go back to the chromatic scale, the half step is the distance from any tone or note in the chromatic scale to the very closest next tone or note. I can't do that here. This is not a chromatic instrument. And a major scale is a heptatonic or 7-tone scale with a certain fixed pattern of whole steps and half steps. A minor scale is also a heptatonic or 7-tone scale, and it is a it has a different pattern of whole steps and half steps, and that's why you perceive it as what we hear as minor and refer to as minor instead of major. Now there's also pentatonic scales. Those are 5-note scales. They are their own unique animal, and when I say 3, I'm leaving out the pentatonics because I can just go in all directions and never get anywhere, and I'm trying to get somewhere. So we're going to speak of heptatonic, or 7-tone plus a repeated tone scales. There's the major and the minor. We're going to speak of the 11-tone plus repeated scale chromatic for 3 scales. I'll do pentatonics in some depth someday, but I haven't yet. This harp is currently tuned so that the strings, if picked in a straight order all the way from one end to the other, constitute the notes of an E flat major scale. These levers on this harp can only raise the pitch. You can't lower the pitch of a harp string on a lever harp. You can only raise it. Now, I know you don't have a harp, but if you want to be able to take all this lesson and the lessons that are like it and work on them at home and not spend a lot of money, you can go to Amazon, you can go to toy stores, you can go anywhere and buy yourself an inexpensive xylophone made out of metal or wood. Get one that doesn't have the 2 rows of notes, but just has 1 row of notes, and that thing will be just exactly as this harp is, a heptatonic scale. And I didn't say major and I didn't say minor because they're both in there, but it's going to be a diatonic or step-by-step scale. It's not going to have all the possible half steps and whole steps. It's going to have all those notes on that xylophone. I just looked them up on my phone at Amazon, and you can get the cheapest one for like $15 that would be worth having. You can get a pretty nice wood one for about $30. And they would be handy to have around to use as a framework for study, and also you teach your kids on them. They're a nice musical toy for the young. So I'm going to do this on a harp. I don't have a xylophone. I'm not going to buy one for that. I have a harp. Do whatever you want, but if you want to really be able to follow along, a diatonic instrument would be handy. Now, if you got a piano, just pretend somebody stole all the black keys and all you have are white keys and the black keys don't exist. And you can do this by pretending that the white keys are all the keys in the world. And I will get into how as I go through the course of this particular lesson, because that's another way to get there. It's much harder with a guitar or any other fretted type instrument because there's really no way on a guitar to tell the difference. Every fret is a half a step, and there's nothing in here which tells you when a major scale would have a whole step and when it would have a half step and all that stuff. Now, I've gone through that. Several of my earlier videos cover that, and if you want to go through the effort, you can do that. There's a lot of ways you can get this information. This harp is currently tuned in a scale which would be an E-flat scale. But I'm going to alter these levers so that it's in C, and that means that this harp is going to be exactly, have exactly the same notes available to it as roughly half, slightly less than half of a piano that somebody stole all the black keys off of. It's only going to be white keys. I'm going to raise this, which is an E, a half a step. This becomes an E natural. It was an E flat. Okay, F, G, there's an A. I'm going to sharp that. It's an A flat. Now I'm making an A natural. There's a B flat. I'm making it a B natural. We go back up. There's our E, A, and B, our E, our A, and B, and our E. Now this, with these levers in this pattern, you don't have to learn any of this. I'm just going over this part so that you, I tell you, and you can have it if you want it. It's free, you know. Comes. Now the red strings, as I said in a previous lesson, are C notes, and the blue strings are F notes. And that would be the same whether or not I've sharped and flatted all this stuff. You know, the flops and chats don't count here. That's just so that harp players can keep track of where they are. Now, a major scale sounds like this. 7 unique notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the first note repeats, and that's an eighth, and that's a major scale. And we can go right on up the harp. And then I've got about another half an octave left up there, and I'm not going to go there. That's a C major scale because this is tuned so that the intervals are for the C. If this were a piano, there'd be black keys tucked in between some of these strings, but it's not. This is a strictly diatonic instrument. If I don't move levers, I can only play a stepwise scale that exists within one structure. Now, does that mean I can only play a C major scale on this harp? Well, no, as a matter of fact, I'm glad you asked. It doesn't mean that. But before I go to those other scales, I'm going to cover some chords. Any chord, anytime you pick a note in a diatonic scale, pick a note, skip a note, pick a note, skip a note, pick a note, you're going to get a chord. That was a C chord. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. If I go up here to my F note, okay, remember I've taught you 1, 4, and 5, right? Okay, C is 1. So then we go 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, it must be magic. 4. That's an F chord. My fifth note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, happens to be a G. Okay, that's your 1, 4, and 5. That is your basic progression of all those church hymns and rock and roll songs and country and western songs and good Lord, who knows, Mozart symphonies and everything. That's kind of your basic progression that human beings have developed in untold different societies. And that's the funny thing about that is the only, using the hit one, skip one, hit one, skip one, hit one pattern, there are only 3 major chords you can make out of a diatonic major scale. That's the chord based on your 1, your 4, and your 5. In this case, that would be C, F, and G. Whoops, that was a C. And when you guys watch me and I'm noodling around on a harp and I'm going, I'm just noodling around on those 3 scales, or those 3 chords. I'm taking these 3 notes and I'm picking them one at a time. And then I'm messing around. And I go to my next chord. I go back where I started because I decided to, and I go to my 5 chord. And that's how it works. That's how I personally improvise. Okay, but those are the only 3 major chords that I can make off of this scale. But I can make a chord off any note. I can start on my C, and I can make a C major chord. I can go to my 2 note, 1, 2, and I can go hit one, skip one, hit one, skip one, hit one. Hey, ain't that a pretty sound? That's a minor chord. Okay, so our first chord is a major chord. Our 2 chord is a minor chord. Our 3 chord is a minor chord. Our 4 chord is a major chord. Our 5 chord is a major chord. Our 6 chord is not only a minor chord, but it's a really special minor chord because it is our 7 chord is a really weird thing because it's what's called a diminished chord. Okay, well now what is a minor chord? A minor chord, the note which is the 3rd, is a half a step flat compared to what it would be if it were a major chord. So on this one, I got a note, that would be a whole step, but I'm not going to use it. That would be another whole step, but I'm going to use it. So that interval there is 2 whole steps. From that note to that note's 2 whole steps. And then from this note to this note is a step and a half. So a major chord is an interval of a whole step, and stacked on top of it is an interval of a half step, or a step and a half. That's what all major chords are made of, those intervals. And you don't know that unless you've bothered to learn it or somebody has taken the time to teach it to you. All you know is that somebody told you to play C, F, and G, and those all sounded like major chords, and so you bought it. That was fine. They were major chords. That's what made them major chords, is the size of the intervals and how your ears recognize those intervals. And if you take that first interval and instead of making it 2 whole steps, you make it 1 and 1/2 step, it becomes a minor interval. And if you take your second interval and you make it 2 whole steps, so that you've got a step and a half with a 2 whole steps stacked on top of it, or a minor interval with a major interval stacked on top of it, your ears hear that and they say minor chord. Maybe they don't. Maybe you haven't gone through that particular phase of education and all you say is, oh, that's pretty, I like that. And it sounds a little different. It sounds a little more mysterious, or it sounds a little more mournful. Strangely enough, although all the cultures of the world recognize major chords and minor chords, they don't all associate these mysteriousnesses and mournfulnesses with them the same way. Some have those emotions flipped over, although the chords are still in their culture. That I can't begin to explain. All I can do is mention that it happens. Okay, so because this thing, okay, note, that's a whole step, that's a whole step, that's a half step, that's a whole step, that's a whole step, that's a whole step, that's a half step. You're probably really sick of hearing me say that, but that's what the intervals in a major scale are. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, 2 whole steps and a half step, 3 whole steps and a half step. Okay, and depending on where you start, those intervals then will be balanced out differently. Okay, if that's a whole step between those 2 strings I'm pinching, and that's a whole step between those 2 strings I'm pinching, and that's a half step between those 2 strings I'm pinching, and that's a whole step. So you go 2 whole steps, step and a half, major interval, minor interval, major chord. Okay, but if you start on any note within a major heptatonic scale, except 1, 4, or 5, those intervals will stack out differently. And the minor intervals and the major intervals will occur in inverted positions. And if you start on the 7th note of a major heptatonic scale, you get a really weird deal, which is that the interval between the 3rd and the 5th, remember this is 1, 3, and 5. And that's because this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, 5. Still here. If I start here, I'm going to call this 1 because 1's wherever I started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And, whoops. Come on, fat fingers. If you start on the 7, the interval that gets flatted is not the interval between the 1st and the 3rd, but it's the interval between the 3rd and the 5th. And that's a different kind of odd-sounding chord. And in the English language, when we're speaking of chord intervals and chord names, we call that a diminished chord. when the interval between the third and the fifth is reduced by half step from what would otherwise be, quote, normal. It's a diminished chord. Okay, so we're going to start on a B here. From B to C is a half step. So from B to D, from C to D is a whole step. So that's a step and a half. But from D to E is a whole step, and from E to F is a half step. So this chord does not have any two whole step intervals. Okay, my basic D minor, okay, that's two whole steps, and that's a step and a half. In my B, which is diminished, that's a step and a half, and that's a step and a half. So my third is only a step and a half away, and my fifth is only a step and a half away. If we shrink both intervals at once, we say that chord is diminished. These are all, we use these size words, okay? Major, I'm major, major, Mr. Big Badass, I'm major. Okay, well, not me, I'm shy, and I'm quieter, and I'm minor, you know? And then somebody came in and they sat up flat on top of my head, and they squinched me down like this. Now I'm diminished. See, that's how it is. That's the way we're using these words. A major chord is a big, strong chord. A minor chord is a slightly more subtle chord, not quite so big. And a diminished chord is just a little all over. And you can tell, your ears know that's not a chord. So let's go through this scale then. If we start with a C major chord, we get a D minor chord. We get an E minor chord. We get an F major chord. We get a G major chord. We get an A minor chord. We get a B diminished chord. And we get a C major chord. That's all the chords you can build in terms of simple first inversion, straight, non-enhanced or expanded chords. A chord in this definition, I've had people get up online and get right up in my face and tell me I'm a fool. This is the established, this is the accepted definition by instructors who know this stuff, who have college degrees, which I don't. A chord is 3 notes. 2 notes is an interval or a double stop, but it's not a chord. 4 notes is an enhanced or expanded chord, which is to say it's more than just 3 notes. Hey, surprise. Okay, so when you're going to play in a given key, you know that you can use some major chords and you can use some minor chords, and they're not sour notes. The great thing about the harp is when they invented the harp, they left all the sour notes out. This is the most uniquely wonderful thing that humans have ever done since they invented making noise. This beats Honey, I Love You in terms of being just uniquely sweet and charming. They left out all the sour notes. On your guitar, you got lots of sour notes. You know, you can play a B flat minor chord when you're playing in C, and it's going to sound pretty rough, unless you have made some sort of harmonic decision leading up to it so that you've built up for people to know they're about to hear a weird note. Man, you hit that B flat minor chord, it's going to sound bad. And if you hit an A major chord, it's not going to sound right. Because all the chords you can make out of the C scale is an A minor chord if you're going to make an A chord. And that's how come that's how come this stuff matters. Okay, because that way you know which chords you can use. And on any given scale, your major chords that you can play are 1, 4, and 5. Your minor chords that you can play are 2, 3, and 6. So you got 3 majors, you got 3 minors. Your diminished chord is 7 diminished. You have 7 unique tones in a heptatonic scale. So you got 7 unique chords that you can start. Chords also have what's called inversions. That means you don't play the, quote, bottom note on the bottom, and the middle note in the middle, and the top note on the top. Say if I want to play a C chord like this. Now see here, I've got a gap. I'm skipping this string But here I'm skipping 2 strings. That's still a C chord because it's made up of the notes of a C chord. C, E, and G. Except I'm playing it E, G, and C. It's inverted. That's called the first inversion. And I'm not going to go into inversions in this lesson because I can just overload you and bury you in stuff. But just to understand that, yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can arrange the notes you can play. But in terms of 3-note chords, what is structurally your basic definition of a chord in any given heptatonic scale, you can play 7 of them. 3 majors, 3 minors, and a diminished. Those chords are what you need to learn for whatever key you're about to play in. If you're about to go sit down with all those guys and they're going to be playing and you're going to be down at the tavern and you're just sitting in on the jam and you want to be able to play in key on absolutely any song they play. If you learn the keys they're most likely to use, okay, they're guitar players. They're going to play in C, they're going to play in G, they're going to play in D, they're going to play in A, they're going to play in E. They're not going to play in F because B-flat chords are too hard and make their hands hurt. And they're not going to play in E-flat because if they do, somebody will get up and go in the kitchen, get a cast iron skillet, come out and smash their face. Kabonk. Unless they're capo junkies, which is cheating. So if you learn C, D, E, G, and A, 5 keys, and you learn the 3 major chords in each of those keys, and the 3 minor chords in each of those keys, and you just forget the diminished chord was ever born because it's too weird anyway, and the diminished chord is the last kid to get asked to join the baseball team. That was me when I was growing up. I know all about being a diminished chord. I grew up as one. Okay, if you know your 3 majors, your 3 minors in every key, I don't care what song they're playing. You can get through it without looking like a fool. That's all you got to have. Now later I'm going to teach you how to read music, probably. Teach you more different things. But this is your basis of playing music in America. Heptatonic scale, 7 notes, 3 major chords, 3 minor chords. Take them to heart and love them. They are your friends. Thank you very much.